So Valerie Nicole Green, I'm just going to read what she sent me, and then I'm adding a little bit to it because I get to be the boss that way. Valerie Nicole Green is a transgender woman who remains active in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Before transitioning, she was married for 34 years and is now widowed. She's the father to 5 children and grandfather to 6 grandchildren. Aware of herself being different since her earliest childhood memories, she followed the path typical to many transgender people of her era and circumstance, growing up and living her life in her gender assigned at birth. After 5 decades of waiting, having discovered that transition was possible when she was just 10 years old, she finally had the opportunity to transition and has been fully socially transitioned since January 1st, 2019. One of her life's goals now is to reach out and/or be available to others who are on their own journey of self-discovery and realization. On a personal note, I came to admire and love Valerie when she spent over 100 hours testing the magnetism of a pair of scissors. I respected her ability to wonder about the world and then to laugh when the results were different than expected. I also learned that in any experiment, the scientist should only have 1 variable, not 2 variables. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to mute myself now and turn the time over to Valerie. Valerie, thank you so much for being our teacher. I'm really excited about this.
Oh, you're welcome. And you used that word again, so now I'm scared. So we'll see how this goes. Now, I based today's lesson on a talk that I used for a reading group that we have, some of the ladies at church. And it's called The Gift of Uncertainty by Amy Tanner, who happens to be a mathematician. So there will be math today. I know you're excited by that. We're going to start by looking at a couple of things. I'm going to share a screen here so that you can see it. We go. All right. I'm watching you for a thumbs up. Bryn, can you see the white screen? Great. Okay. So we are going to talk about, to start, this. Everyone take a look at that and think about what you learned in grade school and decide whether or not you agree with what I've written on the screen. Okay, now you thought about that. Here's the next one. 10 plus 10 equals 20. That seems to me reasonable to you as well. And then we'll ask the question, what is 5 plus 5? Now this goes back to the very first things you learned in grade school. So think about what your answer to that would be. We're not going to answer the question right now. We're going to answer the question at the end of the lesson. Okay. Each one of us, me in particular, let me stop the sharing for a moment, grew up in a church, I'm assuming everyone did, where we often taught to use 2 specific words. And those words are, I know. And we are taught to use these things by example or explicitly. And by example, we may see people stand up in church and give you their testimony. And they will say, I know certain things. And I would always sit in the congregation and think, I think you mean you believe certain things, you know, because there was always that question, what do you know versus what do you believe? And so I was never certain that that was actually the appropriate statement to make for someone. But one thing that I know is that we do not know all things. So we can't know all things. There's just too much to know. God and truth are vast. And in fact, if you took everything that you know and compared it to all the things that were knowable in the universe, what you know is probably close to 0. You know so very little. So the question is then, if we can know so little, how do we find God? How do we reach a point where we feel that we can know that God exists, that God loves us, that God understands who we are? Anything that we want to think about that. So we're going to talk about from a spiritual aspect today about knowing things, but we're going to base it on several other things. Paul wrote in Corinthians about 4 gifts that we receive. He talked about the gifts of wisdom, the gift of knowledge, the gift of faith, and the gift of healing. Now, many of you may have experienced the gift of healing. You may have experienced it yourself. You may have helped someone else heal. That may have been physical healing. It may have been emotional healing. It may have been healing of someone's mental health. There's so many different ways that it could happen. It could have been a very spiritual experience. If you are a priesthood holder, you may have blessed someone. You may have been able to help heal them. Again, from any of those, mental health, emotional, or physical pain or infirmity. All of those things are possible. Faith, the gift of faith. We've all exhibited some degree of faith. The fact that you're here, I think, describes that means that you have exhibited some degree of faith. If you were baptized into the church, you exhibited faith at that point. You may have exhibited faith in accepting a calling or in performing the duties of a calling or any other duty you had in the church or duties within your family. All these things are based upon faith. Things that we don't know that we do anyway are typically identified as faith. And some of us, sometimes me even, have that gift of faith and have the opportunity to believe something so deeply that we're ready to act on it. The gift of wisdom. I have once or twice in my life said something wise. I can't count how many times it might have been. I'm not sure the numbers go that low. But I can guarantee you that the number of times I was naive versus the times that I was wise is a far, far greater number in my naivete. So he gave us 4 gifts, and I'm going to suggest, as the writer of our talk did, that the gift of uncertainty is just as important as the gift of knowledge. And we might think of those 2 things as being opposites. One being certain about something and one being uncertain about something. But I think that instead, we will discover that uncertainty and knowledge are both stepping stones to each other, which sounds a little bit, what's the right word I'm thinking of? Paradoxical. But it's not necessarily so, because it depends on how we think about certain things. Okay, we're going to go back to the sharing for a moment. I want to show you 3 things that we're going to talk about for a little while. And the first is another statement, still more math, but now we're going to talk about what we know. I know that 2 + 3 = 5. Now these statements I'm about to put on here are true for me, and they may be true for you. I know that 2 + 3 = 5. It's a statement of fact, and I've always accepted it as fact. It was taught to me as a fact, and it's simple to validate, because if I take 2 things and put them in a pile, and I take 3 things in another pile, and I scoot them together, and then count all the things, I'll find 5 of them. So it's pretty factual. It seems pretty basic for me. It's something that I don't dispute in any way, and probably no one that you know would dispute either. I know that on a clear day, the sky is blue. This is a different kind of knowledge. This is a subjective piece of knowledge that says, I have experienced the color of blue. I have experienced a clear day. I have seen a cause and effect between looking up at the sky on a clear day and seeing what color the sky is. But it's based on those 2 things. It's based on my experience, and it's based on my understanding of cause and effect and how I've experienced examples of cause and effect. Our third statement is, I know that I love my parents. Oh, they're gone, but I loved them. But how do I know that? And think about this. I didn't plan this, but those first 2 pieces of knowledge were not emotional to me, but that third one is. But this love is something that is entirely subjective. It is entirely understood by me in one way, and it's understood by you possibly in another way. The way that we love our parents, if we love our parents, I know sometimes that doesn't happen. The way that we love our parents is different for every person. But I can know it, and you can know it, but our experiences may be completely different. I want to step back again to the blue for a second, because remember we said it was cause and effect, and we said that it was based upon experience. Think about someone who doesn't have that experience of seeing blue, someone whose eyesight doesn't allow them to see blue, or they're colorblind. They don't know what blue is. Would this statement then be true to them? I know that on a clear day the sky is blue. The authors talked about an example of a scientist who wanted to see what would happen if someone didn't understand what blue meant. And so he purposely never told his daughter from birth what color the sky was. And then after, let's see, I was looking to see what age she was. It just says when his daughter was very young, he was never described the color of the sky to her. Then one day he asked her to look up and describe the color, but she had no idea how to describe it. To you and me, that sounds a little bit foreign. What will we do? And in fact, the author also pointed out in some ancient languages, they didn't even have a word for the color blue. And because they didn't have a word for the color blue, they didn't have the concept of seeing or saying the sky is blue. So for them, it was something that was based upon cause and effect, and they'd never had the cause, so they didn't understand that something was blue. Now, all three things here are things that we know, but they're all different kinds of knowledge. One is factual, one is based upon cause and effect and experience, and the third is based entirely on subjectivity, what we think we do. One other thing that might happen with the third one is that we can measure that by the things that we do. So we might do things because we love our parents. We might call them on their birthdays. We might go over to their homes and do something for them. When we were younger, we might have chosen to obey them like we were asked to do. Or we may have disobeyed them so that they could learn something too. But each one of these things is a different kind of knowledge. I can tell you that I know every one of these things completely, and you may be able to do the same thing, but they're all very different, and they mean different things to each of us. Okay. Now, based upon that, we're going to talk about three other knowledge statements. The first is, I know that the church is true. The second one is that I know that Jesus loves me. The third is, I know that obedience brings blessings. Every one of us is going to experience those three knowledge statements differently. Some of you may look at them and go, I don't know that at all, because that's not where you're at. Some of you may agree with them 100% and have examples you can pull from your lives that say, look, I know this because these things happen. But we're still going to experience each of these things differently. What happens to us as humans, though, is that we take the word I know and we tend to apply that in the same way that we know 2 + 3 = 5. And so we say, this is a fact and therefore it does not change. That's the way I know it. And then we start to apply that to other things. And so then we think about the fact that we know the church is true and we wonder why someone else doesn't. We understand that we have a relationship with Christ. And we wonder why someone else doesn't. Because we know it, how could they not know it as well? It's so obvious to us. But again, these are all born of our experience. So we can't think of a knowledge in the 2 + 3 = 5 thing when we get into spiritual matters. Instead, we have to talk about the sky is blue paradigm, or even the I love my parents paradigm. What I do think we mean when we use I know for each one of these is that we feel the same level of confidence about each one of these statements. So The three statements on the previous slide and all three of these statements have different bases for our knowledge, but we are equally confident about all of them, even though they're different kinds of knowing things. So let's think about a minute let's go back to the previous slide. These three things. I like to think of that first one as what we learn as children. As a child, we were taught facts. We go to, if you were raised in the church, you went to primary, your parents were having home evening, you would learn all these things and you would take them as fact because mom and dad or your leaders told you this is the way it was. But as we grow, all of our spiritual things can suddenly shift from that first one into that second one. And we start experiencing different things. We start seeing cause and effect. We start reading things. We might bump into something we didn't understand and we explore it. And so as we grow, our type of knowledge about the same subject can change from factual to experience-based and finally to fully subjective for each person. Now, if we think about the third one, if we think about knowing God in the same way that we think about 2 + 3 = 5, then when we encounter something that seems to contradict what we thought we knew, it can cause a real crisis. If you found something that contradicted the fact that 2 + 3 = 5, it could cause a crisis for you if you were that concerned about math. And that's hard to go back to. But if you encounter issues with how you understand God, Christ, church, gospel, etc., those are places where you can actually just step back a little bit, explore a little bit, and maybe grow or discard something that you did not understand properly. But anytime that you see something that conflicts with your understanding, it gives you an opportunity to grow your uncertainty. And when you grow your uncertainty, you grow an opportunity to learn and to explore. In fact, knowledge that was complete and certain would actually be limiting and boring. Once you know everything about something, there's nothing else to learn about that thing. And then why would you spend any more time on it? Because there's nothing to expand for yourself. You might then become a teacher of other people to tell them the things that you know. But if you know all the things, it's not going to expand your knowledge of that domain in any way. But a living knowledge, one that is not fully factually based, that we don't know everything about, gives us the opportunity to grow and adapt, and it motivates us to go out and learn and do things, and to improve ourselves and improve those around us as well. That is an embracing of uncertainty and an embracing of not knowing. So this state leads us to our growth and our change. When we have uncertainty, we have an opportunity to learn something, we have an opportunity to explore, we have an opportunity to grow, and we finally have an opportunity to change for ourselves. In fact, we're also very good as humans moving from one degree of understanding to another within a particular realm. So the 2 + 3 = 5, basic math, we all know that one. Then you probably took geometry in high school. And if you took geometry, you advanced to the point of understanding, what's his name? A² + B² = C², the Pythagorean theorem. And then later, humans would take that information and expand it even further and move into the realm of theoretical physics. And we wind up with something like E = mc², which we got, of course, from Einstein. Each one of those things we probably take as a fact because it was taught to us, but they are actually evolutions of the things that we originally learned. So when we started with math, adding, subtracting, we still didn't know. So we still had places to go. We had more things to learn. And fortunately for us, people who were uncertain about what those things meant took the time to learn those things and develop them to teach us. Okay, now sometimes we encounter something that we are wrong about, even though we know it. And that is very difficult for us to let go when we know something, but we find out that we're wrong. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to read a story by this author because I like the story exactly the way she told it. She said, "One day while I was working on this devotional address at home, my 4-year-old daughter was playing on the couch next to me. Our dog Jen barked at the back door, wanting to be let into the house. 'Can you let Jen inside?' I asked my daughter, because what are children for except to do the small tasks you don't feel like doing yourself? But instead of jumping up happily to help, my daughter informed me Jen did not bark. 'Well, I just heard him,' I told her. 'Jen is not outside,' she responded. 'Well,' I said, 'I'm actually looking at the door and I see him standing outside.' 'He is not outside,' she insisted. Because I was working on a devotional address about knowledge, I decided to do that experiment on your own children thing and asked her, 'Do you know that Jen is not outside?' With great confidence, she looked at me and said, 'I know that Jen is not outside.' At this point, I got up myself and let our dog inside, and my daughter exclaimed, 'Oh, Mommy, Jen was outside.' Her apparent, genuine surprise convinced me that she had not been lying when, in the face of visual and oral evidence, she had informed me that our dog was not actually outside barking to be let in. I believe she really knew that the dog was not outside because she wanted him to not be outside. It would have been inconvenient for her if he were outside because she would have to stop playing and go let him in. In that story, she did not want to let go of what she knew because it would affect her in ways that she did not want. And that's something that's often true of us as well. When we know something, we are likely to hold on to that knowledge as tightly as we can. And this is true about ourselves and about others. And for the LGBT community members watching today, this is true about you as you discover yourself. You may have gone through whatever portion of your life believing one thing about yourself, in many ways because that's what you were told. And whenever something was different, you were told that it was wrong. And you may have believed those things were wrong. And then eventually you come to a point where you finally let go of the things that you knew and you discover a new truth. The same thing can happen to an ally. I've talked to many allies who have said, I believed everything that they had heard about how awful the LGBT community was and how wrong they were and how sick they were. And then I met some and I talked to them and I learned about them. And I discovered that they're just children of God as well. In the words of Jill Hazard Rowe, made perfectly just as you are. And they then had to grapple with the same thing. They had to grapple with the dog not being outside. I now have to, once you've met this person, you learn something different. Now you have the cognitive dissonance of dealing with what I've learned and what I've always believed versus what I'm seeing in front of my eyes right now and what I want to do going forward. So it's an opportunity for us to encounter something that we now believe that we were wrong about. And what can we do to move forward? Same thing can be true of church leaders. One thing that we know is that there are certain doctrines that are out there, and we don't know why we have not yet received certain information that we want. We want to have full equality for our LGBT members, but that's not what's come down to us at this point. And that may be because our leaders don't want to ask the question. Or maybe they've asked the question, they've received an answer, but because of the way they perceive that answer, they don't understand it. And so they don't realize that they've been given a different answer, but don't know how to implement it. There are a lot of things that we as humans don't want to let go of. And that is true of every one of us in any position. And of course, we don't want to let go because we know it. If we know it, we just simply want to hang on to it as much as we can. And human beings are very good at categorizing things. We'll look at something and we'll decide how we want it to be. We'll put it in a box. We'll place it over here. We'll organize it. It makes our lives possible. It keeps us from living just in a life of chaos. But that also allows us to bring together order, both in society, in our lives, and in our homes, and in our families. Now the question is, how willing are you, and how hard is it to let go of something that you know? We're going to go back to geometry. And if you took geometry in high school, you learned about Euclid of Alexandria. And Euclid wrote a book called Elements, where he essentially built all of geometry. And he based it upon 5 simple statements that he put forth as postulates, things that are just factually true with no proof needed. The first 4 of those, everyone accepted with no problem. And the 5th one was accepted with no problem at the time as well. But over the years, people started looking at that 5th one. They said, it's kind of complex. Is it right? And basically it talked about the fact that 2 lines will eventually intersect unless they're parallel, in a nutshell. And so that seems straightforward. It seemed to make absolute perfect sense. And mathematicians, though, like to look at things differently. And so they worked on it. They thought there might be some wiggle room in there. So they looked at it and they couldn't figure out what it was. And then eventually one mathematician attacked the problem, and then we'll not discuss how he attacked it. That's not relevant here. But he came to a conclusion. And his conclusion was that any other result would be repugnant to the nature of the straight line. Now that's interesting. The entire basis of his argument was that's just not right. That wouldn't be. That's not the way a straight line would work. So that was the accepted solution. But a century after him, in 2,000 years after Euclid wrote that book, some mathematicians finally asked the question, more basic than these parallel lines and these perpendicular lines and these intersecting lines, what if we are wrong about the nature of straight lines? What if lines in some spaces behave one way, but in other spaces they behave in a completely different way? That's fundamental. That's a question. And that's a scary thing to do, to go back and ask yourself something so fundamental. Do I really understand it? What if it's actually wrong? They did this. They let go of that knowledge. They found out that even when they let go of that knowledge, all of geometry still worked. And then they found out that by tweaking it just a little bit, they created an entirely new kind of geometry, one that's just as valid as the one that they'd always used. So you'll hear the geometry learned about in high school called Euclidean geometry, and then you'll hear the term non-Euclidean geometry. And non-Euclidean geometry includes several different ones, and one of them is called hyperbolic geometry, which is the one that this group of mathematicians learned. And it is just as valid as regular Euclidean geometry, but it describes things in a different environment and space. As she describes it, mathematics, when you spend time with it, has a particular kind of beauty that is not always conveyed well in our school experiences. Hyperbolic geometry has its own beauty, both mathematically and visually. But opening the door to this beauty required humans to admit that what they thought they knew could actually be wrong. And that's what each of us is constantly tasked with doing, is re-examining our beliefs for 2 reasons. 1, to make sure that we are where we think we need to be, and 2, because it allows us to grow and expand and think about things in ways we didn't think before. So that, she offered several questions, and I'm going to ask each of these questions. And I would like to ask if anyone has an example of this question in their life, if you would relate it, if you feel comfortable doing that. And if no one does, that's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. The first one is, am I certain that I truly understand another person's heart and intentions Or could it be that my own experiences make it difficult for me to understand where they are coming from? Second question. When I disagree with someone, am I certain that I am right and they are wrong? Or might I have blind spots? Third question. Could I learn from someone else's perspective? Fourth question. When another person's way of speaking, acting, thinking, worshiping, etc., is unfamiliar to me, am I certain that my discomfort is a lack of the Spirit? Or have I just not yet learned how to see God in that particular setting? And the last question, if you have an example for any of these, just hop in. Am I certain that I have a full understanding of a particular gospel principle or commandment? Or could I learn something from asking questions or listening to another person's experiences?
Valerie?
Yes.
I was thinking about the second to last question about the way people speak, right? And when I go to church, there's a certain way we speak in Relief Society, and a certain way maybe we silence ourselves, especially as women in Sunday school, where it tends to be a lot more male-driven discussion. And I'm thinking a lot about how people can come across, if they don't fit into what you've learned people should look like, how they can come across as being too much, too vocal, or too opinionated, or too loud, or maybe they swear, or whatever these kinds of things are, and how sometimes I've been guilty in the past of not listening to what they're saying because I'm listening to how they're saying it instead. And it's damaged my own ability to grow and to hear new things. So I appreciate that reminder.
Thank you. And I was thinking about something that's happening right now around the country are these allies and appetizers, where their focus is to invite people in to listen to the life experience of an LGBTQ person, people who are not members of the community necessarily, but who want to be allies, who want to come in and say, this is my opportunity to learn, and to, in many cases, to ask questions that you probably shouldn't normally ask, or to hear someone tell a story about themselves or their lives that they normally wouldn't share with you. I had a conversation just yesterday, and we discussed my life and what it was like. And I said, I didn't intend for this discussion to be a dissertation on the intersection of LGBT and LDS and all that it entails. But she said, no, it wasn't what I expected either, but I'm enjoying listening to it because it was new to her. And she wanted to learn more about it. And the whole allies and appetizers thing is an opportunity for that same thing to happen in communities. Right now, a lot of them being done by video. And when we finally get back out of COVID, we'll be able to get back together in person and actually have appetizers with our ally meetings. That'll be fun. So, but each of those 5 questions is something that we need to think about when we're interacting with someone else, especially if we encounter an issue. Phyllis has her hand raised. Go ahead, Phyllis.
So I've been teaching Relief Society almost since we've been here, so probably 3.5 years. And even in this group, and I've mentioned I'll be 60 years old this year. And for the first time, probably in the last year, I have just said stuff. And I'm in the middle of teaching this lesson, and I just say things. And I'm always concerned that people are going to be shocked, because it's not what we talk about in Relief Society. It's not how the lesson is presented. But I have gotten very open and very blunt and very truthful with myself and with my life and with my experiences and what I feel and believe and see because of those experiences. And even on this forum, I've shared some very personal things about my life that I wouldn't normally have shared, but I'm starting to be in this place, I guess, for lack of a better term, where I no longer feel like I can sit here and feel okay about any of this and not say something, not be who I am. And I have a terrible, terrible mouth, okay? Terrible. I tried Spanish, it didn't work, so I stuck with vulgar. Anyway, you know, that offends people. I drink non-alcohol beer. Somebody told me I need to avoid the appearance of evil. How is non-alcohol beer evil? I'm just curious. I have a tattoo, and I was asked if I'd left the church because I got a tattoo. I'm just done, and I just say things, and I tell people the truth. And it has been an awesome experience because some people will no longer speak to me, and other people are like, oh, I can't believe it. I have felt that way for so long. And it's freeing. It's freeing for other people to see that somebody can say that out loud. And so we're all sitting here in this room wishing we could be who we are. And it takes somebody being who they are to open that door.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. John has his hand up.
Okay, so John.
Yep.
Off we go. Okay. Great so far, Valerie. This is awesome. So I was born an only child to two parents, stayed together as a nuclear family. And sometime, I don't know when, before probably the age of 10, I kind of gave up, and it was a 2-on-1 situation, and I kind of just handed my power over to my parents, so to speak, and let them make all the decisions. And the effect of that over the course of my life has been that I'm very open-minded. I guess when I choose to be. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff I haven't been, but I'm prone to play devil's advocate a lot on discussions, and see both sides of the story, and that's helped me in this space because the other side of the story is huge and a lot of times ignored. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was the fallibility thing. And I remembered when you were speaking, when my father, I think probably the first time I heard him swear, I was probably 6 or something. And a bell went off that he's not perfect because he's not doing everything my parents told me to do. And so I guess that would be kind of the beginning of the start of me, in separation of my parents. But I also think that idea of infallibility was transferred elsewhere, and a very good place for that to land, a common place, is the church and the leadership of the church, which is something that today I question a lot of their decisions. Not a lot, but I mean, there's some obvious ones that I think we all scratch our heads about. And when I was younger, I never did that. And that closed me to a number of things that were a number of ideas that were wrong. And it took me a long time to get over that. But I feel like now that I feel like this childhood thing of not making hard decisions on everything is kind of coming back into play, and it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. Yeah, so we all have opportunities to challenge the things that we think we know. And sometimes the things that we think we know surprise us when we discover they're not true or not the way we thought they were. Accepting that we may not know what we think we know does not mean that we need to let go of all of our certainty and all of our conviction. Rather, it means that we can be open to being wrong, and that can place us in a humble position of faith and of learning. And we each have the opportunity to do that, I swear, every day. Now we're going to talk about the God of lost things. When you were a child, no doubt, this is what I taught my children, that's what I was taught, that if you need to know something, or you need to find something, you need to do something, say a little prayer, and you'll get help. All prayers are going to be answered. But let's step back just a little bit, because we don't want this whole question of uncertainty and knowledge to be put together as a stepping stone. Uncertainty can lead to knowledge, but knowledge, as we gain more of it, can lead to further uncertainty. So it's kind of a cycle that they feed into each other. And one thing that we know is, which seems paradoxical, right? One thing that we know is that there is no end to not knowing things while you're mortal. There's always something that you do not know. I'm going to tell a quick story about the God of lost things. And this was a lady that I was home teaching many years ago. And I don't know if I was visiting with her or I was on the phone, but she told me this story of putting together a bookshelf or something, and she had a screw that she couldn't find, and they didn't send any extras. And she didn't know what she was going to do, because it was important to put this thing back together, because it wasn't going to work unless this screw was in place. She couldn't find it anywhere. And so finally she stopped and said a little prayer. And she prayed to find this screw. And she said after she finished the prayer, her arm brushed the pocket on her shirt, and she found that the screw had fallen into the pocket on her shirt. Now I said to her, well, you know, that screw was always in the pocket of your shirt. And the response to your prayer was a prompting for you to check your shirt. And she said, no, I'm fairly certain I checked my shirt and that it wasn't there before I said the prayer. I think God put it there. And this was an example of us both knowing how prayer works and having completely different interpretation of how the answer to her prayer came to her. But this person who finds things for us, this God of lost things, is someone who looks at our simplest prayers and answers them sometimes in ways we did not expect. And sometimes he answers them simply the way we did expect, by telling us exactly what we needed to know. Sometimes an inconsequential prayer can be answered in a way that was difficult for me to explain away. She had an answer to her prayer, and she knew that screw was not in that pocket. How are you going to explain that away? I'm still of the opinion that she just didn't see it in her pocket. But who am I to invalidate her experience? That's what my experience would be. I wouldn't expect to find a metamorphosized screw in my pocket, but she did, and she was ready to accept it. But we can ask us the question, why would God answer a prayer for a lost set of keys or a lost screw or something as simple like that, but not answer prayers that are far more consequential? Why would we move into a position where we say a prayer and we're asking about our life circumstances, our family, our health, a spiritual matter, and we don't get an answer? And I believe part of that is because in many cases, and actually this is pointed out in Relief Society meeting this morning, in many cases, Heavenly Father wants us to exert some effort to get where we need to go, because he doesn't just want to give us everything. He wants us to put the effort in on our side. On the flip side, why do we get the answers to these inconsequential prayers? And one of those reasons is not that we are receiving an answer to the inconsequential prayer. We're not receiving that answer in spite of its being inconsequential, but we're receiving a response because it is inconsequential. Because answering those little inconsequential prayers is one way for Heavenly Father to gently remind us that he loves us. You had this little thing, and I'm going to give you this one, because maybe you've already looked everywhere and you can't find it. You're at wit's end. You can't find the screw. You can't find your keys. You can't find the bottle of medicine that you have to have. And so you finally just ask, and he goes, all right, you've done everything you need to do. Poof, here. It may seem inconsequential, but it isn't necessarily to everyone. But he answers inconsequential prayers for that reason. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our math. I know you're excited about that. And we're going to discuss the answer to that question. And because I find just in this little example of these questions, a lot of interesting truths. Okay, let's get to that slide. Where's my cursor? There it is. Okay, so we're back to here. So I think we'll all agree that 10 plus 10 equals 100. I'm sorry, 10 times 10 is 100. And I don't think any of us have any heartache over 10 plus 10 equaling 20. But we still have the question of what is 5 plus 5? And I'm going to tell you right now that one of the answers is 10. But it's not the only answer. What are the other answers? I'm going to talk about this set of equations right here, because we think a lot of these things about this equation. When we're taught math in high school, in grade school and high school, we are almost always taught to work in base 10. And nobody really points that out to us that we're using a decimal system. But everyone assumes, and you'll do almost all your math in your life in a base 10. But I'm a software developer, and so I have been introduced to alternate bases all my life. So whereas you normally think of, or most people normally think of numbers and being composed of these digits 0 through 9, 10 digits, therefore a decimal system, I often work with binary, where there's only 2 digits, 0, 1. And so these numbers will look very different in binary. I also work with octal, a base 8, where there's only 0 through 7, or 8 digits. And I work, of course, with decimal, and then I very often work with hexadecimal, where there are 16 digits, 0 through F. Now, the question is then, when you look at this set of equations, what assumptions did you make? And I can guarantee you that almost all of you just assumed that that was base 10 math, and that you knew what it was. One of the things that we do is we write things down, we record things, we document how things are presented. And everyone assumes that if it's this way, then it's base 10. But it can also be written like this. And you want to put the base in there, you put a little number in subscript after the number that says this is what base it is. This is the same equation from the previous one, but with the bases put in place. So what if we change the base? If we change the base to 9, that last equation is now 5 plus 5 equals what we call 11. We write it as 11 that we normally see in decimal. But this looks very odd, but it's actually correct. If it's base 8, the answer is 12. If it's base 7, the answer is 13. If it's base 6, the answer is 14. And that's the end of the ambiguity. We have a 5 in the equation, so we have to have at least 5 digits, so base 6 is as low as we can go, 0 through 5. And if we did any other base above 10, then it would always be 5 plus 5 equals 10, because we wouldn't go across any boundaries. But let's think about this for a minute, because this set of equations gave me a whole bunch of lessons. We're going to go through this final list of lessons and we'll be done for the day. Number 1 is uncertainty. When you were back on this page, I'm pushing the wrong button, sorry. When you're back on this page, there's a certain level of uncertainty. You may have wondered, is she trying to trick me? It's so obvious. So if the obvious answer is 10, then what is Valerie trying to do to make me think that it's not? You may think, is this some one of those memes that you see running around on Facebook all the time when they say, please solve this, and then I'll let you know if you're right. And they spend 15 minutes telling you, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. because you're missing some piece of information or some little bit of detail. And in this case, you don't know, you have no idea what base I'm using, but you make assumptions that you do. So there may have been a level of uncertainty, and I think that uncertainty is where, that's the space where we seek truth. When we don't know something, we're finally ready to go looking for it. If we know it, we think we know it, we're not interested, we're not going to grow in any way. But uncertainty is a space where we seek truth. So when I said there was uncertainty here, that may or may not be 10, that may have given you the opportunity to wonder what other possibilities might exist. Second, we all have our doubts about things, and we're often afraid to voice them. So if I'd asked you in a group, in a room, what the answer was, and you would have probably had two uncertain things. One is Valerie trying to trick me? And two is, what could possibly be the different answer? And so there's uncertainty as to why it might be something else. And that leads to, sometimes we are not aware that we should even be uncertain because we are so rooted in what we think we know. Some of you may have looked at this and said, there's no other way. That could be anything other than 10, because I'm rooted in the way that I understand math. And if you haven't worked with other bases, it's not going to be something that's normal to you. We are often trapped in our own orthodoxy and unaware of the basis of a different point of view. If you're not used to working with other bases, it may never have even occurred to you that this was a different base. I'm reminded of you may have listened to the Click and Clack brothers, the Tappet brothers, our car talk. Years ago, they did this exact thing. It was a little bit different. They said you're sitting on Earth and you get this super powerful telescope and you can see all the way to this other planet, and you can see through a window into a classroom and you see 3 equations written. And it was 3 like this, except the answer was supplied in the third one. And the third one was probably an 11 or a 12, it doesn't matter. And then the question and the puzzler for that week was, how many fingers do the aliens have? By looking at these 3 equations, how many fingers do the aliens have? And of course, at the time, the answer was 7, based upon the equations they'd been giving. Because you could see that although 2 of the equations look normally in base 10, the other one could only be solved in base 7. And we have 10 digits because we have 10 fingers. That's why we have a decimal system. So we are often trapped in our own orthodoxy, and we have to know that there's something else to look at before we can even examine it. But we're simply unaware sometimes. Okay, next is exposure to a new set of facts can lead you to a new conclusion. Once I told you that this might not be in base 10, and if you've never worked in other bases, once I told you that other bases existed, then it leads you to the opportunity to explore this in different ways. Specifically for looking for the base that answers the question, or identifying the fact that, hey, there are a number of bases that could cause this to be something other than what I expected it to be. Like, we can look at this and see that it has to be at least base 6, and that the solution won't be any different above base 10. But between 6, 7, 8, and 9, we have a question we have to ask because we're not sure what the answer would be. All right, so working in an alternate base, like working with an unfamiliar set of information, will seem very strange, and it takes some time to get used to. And I will close with this last anecdote, because when I discussed this in my reading group at church, one of the sisters piped up and she said, this happened to her. She was going through a teaching class, and they were working with learning how to teach people with developmental disabilities. And they wanted you to understand how difficult it was to work with the math that you normally know, even as simple as it is to you, if you don't have a rooted understanding of math. And so they gave them worksheets to do. And I think she said every problem was in a different base. So they had to do math in a different base for every problem to get the correct answer. And she said it was the most confusing assignment she'd ever had in her entire life because she was not familiar with bases. She didn't know exactly how they work. She didn't know how to convert between them. Now I'm in a position, and I know there's some other people here that are technical, that we do this all the time. We're used to do this. We know exactly how to do this. But someone who's not familiar with it, just not exposed to it regularly, it would be a shock. And it was to her, because she was given this specifically to help her understand what she thought was so simple, but someone else might not understand. And just as if those aliens I talked to at the base 7 number system came down here, they would be able to do math like that in a base 7, but they would look at our base 10 system and ask what the heck we were doing, because it wouldn't be familiar to them. So there are all opportunities for uncertainty in our lives. There are uncertainty for who we are, for how we approach our spiritual matters, how we approach church, how we understand the things that the church teaches us. I mean, it can be applied everywhere, but specifically in spiritual matters, where we have something that is based almost completely on faith, and we work through that faith to get to the point where we can be certain and feel as strongly about a principle or an idea as we feel about the fact that 2 + 3 = 5. And I'll close this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Let me unshare for you.
Thank you. And I realized I totally messed up. We didn't say an opening prayer, and I didn't ask anybody to say a closing prayer. So that tells you how often I lead Sunday school. Thank you, Valerie, for that really amazing lesson. Also, I hate math, so I'm really grateful that there are people like you who can do the mathy things, because that's not my thing.
By the way, we no longer say opening prayers in Sunday school.
Oh, so I didn't mess up.
No,
Yay!
you didn't.
Totally knew that. That's why we didn't say one here either. Can I please ask for a volunteer to say the closing prayer? And forgive me for not setting it up ahead of time. I hate putting people on the spot like that. No? That's totally fine. I'll say it. Oh, Snow volunteered. Yay! Oh, and you volunteered too. Okay, I'm gonna let Snow do it just because that's the first one I recognized. Thank you for your support. All right, Snow, you're up.
Dear Father in heaven, we thank thee for this day that we could gather as members of iChurch to study and learn together, to broaden our minds and expand our vision of the possibilities of thy creation. We ask thee to bless us each, that thy Spirit will carry with us the message of this day into our hearts, to help us to seek to help thy own children as well as ourselves to come closer to thee. And this we pray in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, did I meet your expectations?
That was incredible, Valerie. I really appreciated it. How did you feel about it?
I felt really good about it. I was nervous for I don't know how long. I'm like, how long is it going to last? Is it going to be long enough? And it turns out it's just right. So, and then you think all the things I thought about when I was practicing, am I going to remember them this time around? So, but it worked out. So,
I think it's a little odd on the Zoom platform because you don't get that same reaction that you can expect to get in a live room, right?
Yeah.
The chuckles from people, or it's hard to notice the head nodding or whatever.
yeah.
So
Normally I do this on a phone, and so I'm always focused on the speaker. And when you start speaking, it just freezes on the last person who was speaking, right? And you don't see anybody. So today I pulled out the laptop and ran it on the laptop so I could see everybody. And it was much easier to see everyone because I could look around and I could see some responses. And